I'm 38 years old, which might be considered young, but I've lived through quite a lot. My name is Kim Sunjin, and I've been working as a caregiver for a long time, primarily in hospitals. Over time, I got faster and more perceptive with patients. It's a bit awkward to say, but people around me often praised my work. Despite being young, they would often say, "Sunjin, you're amazing at your job." And even doctors at university hospitals would compliment me. I could quickly tell when someone was in trouble, and if a patient was uncomfortable, I could pick it up just by looking at their eyes. Because of this, family members of patients started being a bit more cautious around me. I've been surviving hard since I was a kid. I started working at 18, doing menial jobs, and by the time I was 20, I was folding sheets in a hospital. I never really knew what it was like to rest. I became quite well known in Seoul's big hospitals. I worked in emergency rooms and cardiology, where the families of patients were often difficult to deal with. But even those families would say, "If Sunjin's here, we can trust her to take care of them." However, over time, I started feeling a bit worn out. The main issue was with the families. Many didn't know what their loved ones liked or disliked, and they would often unload their guilt on me, yelling at me in the process. Plus, since I was younger than most other caregivers, I often got dismissed or underestimated. That's when I remembered the caregiving certificate I earned a long time ago. Maybe it was time to shift towards senior care. I began reducing my hospital work and started considering job opportunities elsewhere. One day, a colleague, who was a bit older than me, quietly called me over to the break room. She handed me a business card and whispered, "This is a rare opportunity, just for you. They won't hire anyone who isn't from the East Side, and you're from there, so I've already recommended you." I hesitated for a moment. The area she was talking about, Donggu, wasn't one I had fond memories of, but my colleague encouraged me to go for it. "If you work there, you'll be set for life. The salary's guaranteed and the benefits are amazing. Just go, make some money, and live like a king later." The idea was tempting, so I eventually called the number on the card and scheduled an interview. When I arrived, it was in one of Seoul's upscale residential neighborhoods, a place most people only visit once in their lives. The surroundings were luxurious, with old trees lining the streets and a view of the mountain in the background. I knew right away this was a wealthy family. An older housekeeper greeted me, and I was surprised by how welcoming she was, especially considering how often people in her position could be cold. When I stepped inside, I made a point to straighten my shirt, wipe a little sweat off my forehead, and take a deep breath. A young man who introduced himself as the family secretary greeted me in the living room. "This is our madam," he said, gesturing toward a woman seated on a sleek, high-backed chair. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, stylish and composed. She didn't say much, just gave me a brief nod, and her cool demeanor made it clear that she was the one in charge. As the secretary explained, the elderly woman I'd be caring for had dementia. "She's not like most elderly folks," he said. "She's very particular, and she's used to being treated with the utmost respect. That's why it's been difficult to find someone who can stay long." He went on to say they'd tried multiple caregivers before, but no one had lasted very long. "But your profile stood out. You started young, you've got solid experience, and your reputation is excellent. We're hoping you'll be the one to stay." I listened carefully, doing my best to keep my composure. "I have a lot of experience with elderly care," I said calmly. "If anything feels off, please let me know. I'll do my best to adjust." The interview was more pleasant than I'd anticipated. Most of the questions came from the secretary. The madam remained mostly silent, though her sharp gaze rarely left me. After a while, I stood up to leave, thinking the conversation was over. That's when she spoke for the first time, her voice steady and direct. "Are you from Donggu?" I nodded, a bit puzzled. "Yes, madam." She hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "You wouldn't have worked for my mother before, would you?" I shook my head, feeling a little uneasy. "No, I don't believe so." Her brow furrowed, and she let out a long sigh. "I see. Never mind then." It was clear she had more to say, but she stopped herself. The secretary quickly wrapped up the meeting and showed me out. "We'll call you with our decision," he said. I thanked him and left the house, my thoughts spinning. The next morning, I arrived for my first day. The elderly woman, Kim Malsoon, was seated on a large sofa in the living room when I met her. Despite her dementia, she had a presence that was hard to ignore. Her posture was upright, her movements quick and deliberate. She even kept herself remarkably tidy, constantly smoothing her clothes or brushing away any imagined dust. When she pointed at something, she did it sharply, almost with a sense of command. Compared to hospital caregiving, this was less demanding. I helped with meals, medication, and short walks. The madam rarely spoke to me, but the other staff, especially the housekeeper Miok, were more welcoming. They seemed relieved I hadn't left after just a couple of days. A week in, Miok pulled me aside after my shift. "What do you think of her?" she asked. "Well, she's different, but I think I'm getting used to it." Miyok gave me a knowing look. Before the dementia, she wasn't so focused on certain things. But now, she's fixated on Donggu and that pink hanbok. It's strange. Every Friday, like clockwork, she insists on wearing it. And if there's even the smallest wrinkle, she throws a fit. No one knows why. She paused, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. She never talks about it directly, though. Whenever we ask why she cares so much about that hanbok, she just shuts down. I couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity. I had heard about her fixation with Donggu during the interview, and now it seemed the hanbok was another piece of the puzzle. It felt like there was a story here, something buried in her past that she couldn't let go of. Despite the strangeness, I was determined to focus on my work. It wasn't my place to dig into her personal history, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened in Donggu that left such a mark on her. By the end of the second week, the atmosphere in the household started to shift. Kim Malson still didn't speak much, but her demeanor toward me had changed. Her previously sharp, distant glances now carried a glimmer of recognition, even warmth. She would watch me more attentively, and sometimes smile faintly when I brought her tea or helped adjust her blanket. I didn't fully understand why, but I could tell she was beginning to trust me. One afternoon, while we were sitting together in the living room, she suddenly turned to me and asked, "You're from Donggu, aren't you?" Caught off guard, I nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I am." She gazed at me for a long moment, as if searching for something in my face. Were you ever at the care center in Jaehyun-dong?" I hesitated, the name triggering a vague, uneasy feeling. "I'm not sure." "Why do you ask?" Her expression shifted, and for a fleeting moment her cloudy eyes seemed clear and sharp. I don't know. I just thought, never mind." That brief exchange stuck with me. She rarely spoke so directly, and her tone had a strange mix of urgency and sadness. I didn't press further at the time, but later that night, I found myself wondering about that care center. I had lived in Donggu as a child, but my memories of that time were hazy, like looking through a fogged window. Could I have been at the same place she was talking about? It seemed unlikely, but the thought nagged at me. A few days later, while helping her to her room after a morning walk, I noticed a small old wallet lying on the floor near the couch. Assuming it had fallen out of her pocket, I picked it up and opened it, intending to put everything back in place. That's when I saw the photograph. It was a faded, black and white picture of a young girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The child had a thin frame, a choppy bob haircut, and was dressed in a worn, oversized coat. Something about the image hit me deeply. The girl's expression was a mix of vulnerability and resilience, eyes that seemed far older than her years. I placed the wallet back where I found it and tried to push the image out of my mind, but it lingered. The face in that photograph felt eerily familiar, though I couldn't figure out why. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was that girl? Why did Kim Malson keep her picture? It wasn't the kind of photograph you'd expect from a wealthy family's collection. Compared to the neatly framed portraits of grandchildren in graduation gowns and family vacations in pristine resorts, this photo seemed out of place. Too raw, too real. One evening, while I was tidying up her room, Miyok came by to chat. "How's it going, Sunjin?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Not bad," I said, still folding a blanket. "The madam's been quieter than usual today. She gets like that sometimes," Miyok replied, lowering her voice. "You know, she never says it, but I think she's always looking for someone." I stopped what I was doing and glanced at her. "Looking for someone?" "Yeah," Miyok said, her tone conspiratorial. "It started after her dementia got worse. She'd talk about a child, or sometimes just mention her girl. We never knew exactly what she meant. At first, the family thought she was mixing up memories, but over time it became clear this wasn't just some random confusion. I felt a chill run through me. "Do you think it could be a relative?" Miyok shrugged. "Who knows? It's not like anyone in the family talks about it. The madam's daughter-in-law, the one in charge, is super strict. She hates any mention of the past, especially anything that might stir up drama. But there's something there, Sunjin. I'm sure of it." Her words stirred up a mix of curiosity and unease. I didn't know what to make of it, but I couldn't deny that Kim Malson's behavior was increasingly strange. Every Friday, she still insisted on wearing that pink hanbok, making the whole house tense. And now this talk of a missing child. Who could it have been? Later that week, while on a short walk through the garden, Kim Malson stopped suddenly and turned to me. "What year were you born?" she asked. 1985, I replied, surprised by the question. She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. 1985, I see. We continued walking, but her mood had shifted. It was as if she'd connected a piece of a puzzle in her mind, though she didn't share it with me. I wanted to ask more, to understand what she was thinking, but something in her demeanor held me back. It felt like she needed to process it on her own. At the end of the week, the house was busier than usual. There was a strange tension in the air, and I noticed that the other staff seemed on edge. On Friday morning, as expected, Kim Malson asked for her pink handbook. As I helped her dress, I couldn't shake the feeling that this routine meant more than anyone realized. Even as she fidgeted with the hem, smoothing out non-existent wrinkles, I could see her mind was elsewhere. When she finally settled into her seat by the window, I quietly stepped out of the room. I had my own questions now. I needed to know more about that photograph, about the care center in Donggu, and about this missing girl who seemed to haunt her thoughts. There were too many pieces that didn't fit, and the more I tried to ignore them, the more they seemed to demand my attention. A few days later, something happened that completely changed my understanding of what was going on in the household. It was early afternoon, and I was organizing some of the madam's belongings when I heard voices in the hallway. Curious, I stepped out to see the madam's daughter-in-law speaking sharply to the secretary. She sounded tense, though I couldn't make out exactly what she was saying. When she saw me standing there, her expression shifted, and she motioned for the secretary to lower his voice. I quickly looked away and went back to what I was doing, but the brief encounter left me on edge. That evening, as I was walking past the living room, I noticed something odd. The madam was sitting by the window, as she often did, but her posture was different, more upright, as if she was waiting for someone. I hesitated, then approached her quietly. Before I could say anything, she turned and looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "You're from Donggu," she said firmly, almost like an accusation. Her tone was so different from her usual calm demeanor that it startled me. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I thought you might be her," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "You remind me of someone I lost." I swallowed hard, my heart beating faster. "Who do I remind you of, ma'am?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone her age. "It doesn't matter," she said after a long pause. "If you were her, you would have said so." The encounter left me shaken. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I began to piece together the fragments of her remarks, the photograph, and the way she seemed to light up whenever she saw me. It was as if she saw someone she loved when she looked at me, but I didn't know who. One morning, I decided to speak to Miyok about it. I caught her in the kitchen as she was preparing breakfast. "Miyok, have you ever heard the madam mention a missing child?" She glanced around to make sure we were alone, then lowered her voice. "She's mentioned it a few times, something about a daughter, but no one talks about it openly. It's like a family secret. Do you think she's confusing me with that person?" I asked. Miyok frowned, considering the question. "It's possible. She's always had this idea that the child might come back one day. When you showed up, well, you're about the right age. Maybe she saw a resemblance." I nodded slowly, not sure what to make of it. "It's strange, though. I don't remember anything like that from my childhood. Sometimes memories fade," Miyok said softly. "But maybe hers haven't. Maybe she's holding on to something she never got to say." Her words stayed with me throughout the day. I found myself replaying my own childhood memories, trying to uncover any connection to Donggu or to the madam's family. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually remembered. My early years were a blur of different caretakers, different homes. Could it be that I was somehow connected to her after all? That evening, I decided to look through some old documents I had stored away. Among the papers was an old registration form from when I first started school. It listed my birthplace as Donggu, which I already knew, but something else caught my eye. A faded stamp in the corner that read, Jaehyun-dong Care Center. My hands trembled as I held the paper. I had been there. The place she had mentioned wasn't just a coincidence. It was part of my own history. The next morning, I arrived at work feeling like I was on the verge of a revelation. When I entered the house, the secretary pulled me aside. "The madam has been asking for you," he said. I went straight to her room. She was sitting up in bed, looking more alert than usual. As soon as I entered, her face softened. "You came back," she said quietly. "Yes, I'm here," I replied, unsure what she meant. For the first time, she began to tell me about her past. She spoke of a daughter she had lost, a child who had been taken from her many years ago. Her voice cracked as she described how she had searched for that child, how she had never stopped hoping to see her again. "I was told she was gone," she said, tears welling in her eyes. But I never believed it. Not in my heart. I didn't know how to respond. A part of me wanted to tell her that I might be that child, but another part of me was terrified to give her false hope. Instead, I sat with her, holding her hand, as she poured out years of pain and longing. After that conversation, I couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. I had to find out the truth. I contacted a former teacher who had worked at the care center during my time there. Through her, I learned that records from that period were sparse due to a fire that had destroyed many of the files. Still, she recalled a little girl who had been placed there after losing her family. Her name was Min Jung, she said. But she was very young. She might not remember much. Min Jung. The name sent a shiver down my spine. Could it have been my original name before I was taken to another home and my records were changed? I didn't know for sure, but the pieces seemed to be falling into place. When I returned to the madam's house, I felt a newfound sense of connection to her. If there was even a chance that I was her lost granddaughter, I had to give her closure. She deserved that much after all these years. Over the next few days, I found myself replaying the madam's words over and over again. Could I really be her missing granddaughter? The idea seemed absurd at first, but the more I thought about it, the less it felt like mere coincidence. The timing, the age, even the faint familiarity I felt whenever she looked at me, everything began to add up. I decided it was time to take a step forward and dig deeper into my past. One quiet afternoon, when the madam was napping, I found Miok in the kitchen and told her about the faint memory I'd uncovered, the stamp on my old school registration paper that tied me to Jaehyundong Care Center. Miok's eyes widened slightly. I thought you didn't remember anything about that place. I didn't, I admitted. But seeing that stamp brought something back. I think I was there, Miok. I think it's possible that the madam's granddaughter might be me. Miok put down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables and leaned against the counter. That's a big thing to claim. You know what it would mean if it's true. I nodded. I'm not saying it is. I need to know for sure. I've spent so much of my life not knowing where I came from, who my family really is. If there's even a chance that this connection is real, I need to find out. Miok sighed and crossed her arms. You need proof, Sunjin. Something solid. Otherwise, you're just guessing, and that can hurt everyone involved. She was right, of course. I couldn't bring it up with the madam or anyone else until I had something definitive. But where could I find that proof? The care center records were mostly gone, and the teacher who remembered Minjung didn't have anything concrete. I needed another source, another lead. The following morning, I called the teacher again, hoping she might recall something more. Do you remember if anyone ever took photos of the children? I asked. She paused for a moment before answering. I don't think so. Back then, we didn't have the resources or the habit of documenting everything like people do now. But, she hesitated, then continued. There was one staff member who loved taking pictures. She had a little camera and would sometimes snap photos of the kids. I'm not sure what happened to her or the pictures, though. It wasn't much, but it was something. I asked for the staff member's name, and the teacher remembered it after a bit of thought. Her name was Mrs. Kang. She left the center a few years after you would have been there. I don't know where she went, but if you could find her, she might have something. Finding Mrs. Kang turned out to be a challenge. I searched online, went through old directories, and even contacted a few local organizations that worked with the center in the past. It took several weeks, but eventually I got a lead. Mrs. Kang had retired and was living in a small town about an hour outside Seoul. Armed with this new information, I decided to pay her a visit. When I arrived at her modest home, she seemed surprised to see me, but was polite and welcoming. I explained who I was and what I was looking for, showing her the old registration paper with the Jaehyundong stamp. She squinted at it, her face softening. I remember that place, she said. And yes, I do recall taking some pictures back then. I always thought it was important to keep little memories of the children. You never know when they might want to look back. I felt a flicker of hope. Do you still have any of those photos? She frowned, thinking. I might. I kept a box of old pictures and mementos when I left the center. It's been years, though. They might be faded or damaged. Could I see them? I asked, my voice almost trembling. She nodded and disappeared into another room. When she returned, she was carrying a small, weathered box. As she opened it, the smell of old paper and time wafted out. Inside were dozens of photographs, some black and white, others in early color. Many were blurry or faded, but a few were clear enough to make out faces and details. I carefully sifted through the pile, my hands shaking slightly. At first, nothing seemed familiar. Then, near the bottom of the box, I found it. A picture of a little girl with a choppy bob haircut, standing in front of a plain brick wall. She looked about 6 or 7 years old, dressed in an oversized coat. My heart raced. It was the same girl from the photo I'd seen in the madam's wallet. I turned to Mrs. Kang, holding the photo up. Do you remember this girl? She took a long look at the picture, then nodded slowly. That's Min Jung. She was one of the quieter kids, but she had a sweet smile when you got her to open up. I remember feeling sorry for her because she didn't have anyone. Most of the other kids had someone come for them eventually, but not her. I stared at the photograph, my mind reeling. Could I really be Min Jung? If I was, then it meant the madam was telling the truth. It meant I had found my family, not just anyone, but the grandmother who had never stopped looking for me. I think that's me, I said softly, almost to myself. Mrs. Kang looked at me curiously. I've been searching for answers, and this might be it. She nodded gently. If it is you, then I hope it gives you some peace. Everyone deserves to know where they come from. Thanking Mrs. Kang profusely, I left her home with the photograph tucked safely in my bag. I finally had something tangible, something I could take back to the madam. But the thought of confronting her with it filled me with both excitement and dread. What if it wasn't enough? What if she didn't believe me? Back at the house, I decided to wait for the right moment. The madam was still resting, and I knew this wasn't a conversation to rush into. I spent the evening staring at the photo, tracing the lines of the little girl's face with my finger. She looked so lost, so alone, but she had survived. Somehow, through all the confusion and uncertainty, she had found her way to this place, to this family. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I would show her the photo. I would tell her everything I had learned. And then, I would finally know if she was truly my grandmother. The next morning, I waited until the madam was fully awake and settled in her chair by the window before bringing her the photograph. I didn't want to rush her, and I didn't want to startle her. Instead, I approached gently, holding the small photo like a fragile treasure. Madam, I began carefully, there's something I'd like to show you. Her cloudy eyes met mine, a flicker of curiosity in them. She looked down at the picture as I handed it to her. For a moment, she just stared at it, not saying anything. Then slowly, her hands began to tremble. This is her, she whispered. My Minjung. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. You're her, aren't you? You're my Minjung. My throat tightened, and I nodded. I think I am, ma'am. I've been trying to piece everything together, and I think this photograph confirms it. I grew up in Jaehyundong, just like you said. I didn't know my real name. My records were changed when I was young, but everything points to me being your granddaughter. The room was quiet, except for the sound of her unsteady breathing. Her hand reached out and I took it, feeling the frailty of her fingers as they wrapped around mine. I never stopped hoping, she said. Even when everyone told me you were gone, I never stopped. For the first time, I truly felt like I belonged somewhere. All the years of not knowing, of feeling untethered, melted away in that moment. I'm here now, I said softly. I found you. Her grip on my hand tightened. You're home, she whispered, her voice full of both joy and sorrow. But our moment of connection was short-lived. Almost as soon as I confirmed my identity, the household erupted into chaos. The madam's daughter-in-law, who had been growing increasingly suspicious, overheard our conversation and stormed into the room. What's going on here? She demanded, her sharp gaze bouncing between me and the madam. What is she saying, mother? The madam clutched the photograph tightly. She's Minjung. She's my granddaughter. Her daughter-in-law's face went pale. What? No, that's impossible. I stepped back, not wanting to escalate the tension, but the madam stood her ground. I know it's her. I'd recognize my own blood anywhere. What proof do you have? The daughter-in-law snapped. A single photograph isn't enough. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old registration document, showing the Jaehyundong stamp. I found this, I said. And there's someone who worked at the care center who remembers me. She even kept photos from that time. This picture was taken when I was at the center. The daughter-in-law crossed her arms, clearly unconvinced. And how do we know you didn't just find this photo and make up a story? This family doesn't need someone pretending to be… Enough! The madam's voice rang out, stronger than I'd ever heard it. I know who she is. She's my Minjung, and I will not hear otherwise. The daughter-in-law hesitated, clearly conflicted. Mother, think about what this means. If she's really your granddaughter, it changes everything. There will be questions, rumors. It could damage the family's reputation. I don't care about the family's reputation, the madam said firmly. This is my flesh and blood. I've waited years to see her again, and I won't let anyone take her from me. I stood in silence, feeling like an outsider in the midst of their argument. But when the madam looked at me, her eyes softened. You don't have to say anything, she said. I know who you are. It wasn't just about me anymore. This was her moment, her chance to finally find peace after decades of uncertainty. The daughter-in-law left the room in a huff, leaving the two of us alone once again. The madam reached out and took my hand. You've brought me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The days that followed were tense. The other family members were informed, and there were many difficult conversations. Some were skeptical, others wary, and a few were quietly supportive. As more details came to light, letters, additional witnesses, and a DNA test that I eventually agreed to, doubt slowly gave way to acceptance. The madam's health began to improve in subtle ways. She smiled more often, her eyes brightened, and she seemed to carry less of the weight she had borne for so long. I continued to care for her, but our relationship changed. I was no longer just her caregiver. I was her granddaughter. We spent hours talking about her memories, her regrets, and her dreams for the family's future. For the first time in my life, I felt like I truly had a place, a history, and a connection that couldn't be taken away. In the end, the madam passed away peacefully in her sleep, holding the photograph of Minjung, of me, in her hands. The household was quiet that morning, and though the loss was profound, there was also a sense of closure. She had found what she was looking for, and so had I. As the family settled her affairs, I decided to step away from the household. I didn't want to cause any more friction, and I felt it was time to build my own life, knowing I now carried a piece of her story with me. I moved to a small town, started anew, and kept the photograph in a special place. It wasn't just a reminder of her, it was a reminder that even when you feel lost, there's always a chance to find where you belong.